In this episode, Christopher Moseley talked about the state of the Estonian language, translations, his work on minority and endangered languages, and his translation of The Man Who Spoke Snakish, a beautiful moving story of a boy who is tasked with preserving ancient traditions in the face of modernity, written by famous Estonian author Andrus Kiviräki. Christopher Moseley has been the general editor of UNESCO Atlas of the World Languages Endangered since 2008 and is now a member of the editorial team of its successor, the World Atlas of Languages. From 2007 to 2011, he was a teaching fellow in Latvian at the School of Slavonic and East European Studies at University College London. Originally from Australia, he came to Britain to study Scandinavian languages in 1974. But since then, his main interests have slipped eastwards to Finland and the Baltic countries. While working as a journalist and translator specialising in Baltic affairs at the BBC Monitoring, he completed an M.Phil on the dying Livonian language of Latvia, a close relative of Estonian. After 19 years of service at the BBC, he became a freelance translator and editor in 2005. He is the author of Colloquial Estonian and co-author of Colloquial Latvian for Routledge and edited the publisher's Encyclopedia of the world's endangered languages, and most recently the third edition of the Atlas of the World Languages Endangered for UNESCO. His most recent work is a revision of George Campbell's Routledge Handbook of Scripts and Alphabets. He translates into English from Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian, Finnish, Danish and Swedish. To buy the novel The Man Who Spoke Snakish, you may please use the link given in the show notes. So, what was your first interaction with Estonian and why did you decide to translate it?
Well, it's a complicated story. My first awareness of Estonia was back in, and the language was back in Australia when I was a child. And my German teacher at school was Estonian. And she wasn't trying to interest me in the language, but I got interested in it anyway. And I started asking her a lot of questions about it. But later on, I came to study Finnish. I taught myself Finnish. And then later I had a chance to study it and even to go to Finland. And I met my wife there. She's Finnish. And we started taking holidays in Estonia from Finland when we lived there. I had a lectureship in Finland for about 4 years. And we started taking holidays there and I got more and more interested in the language. And that's how it developed. So my interaction with Estonian literature came a little bit later.
Now, Finnish and Estonian, I think there are some similarities there between those two languages I read.
Yeah, they're quite similar, but they're not understandable to each other. They are quite similar. Of course, I suppose my interest in Finnish inspired my interest in Estonian. Yeah.
You worked with the BBC as a journalist and a translator too. Can you tell us about that stint with BBC?
At the BBC, I worked for the BBC Monitoring Service, which is a part of the World Service. It still exists, but it's more specialised. And it deals with fewer countries nowadays than it used to when I worked there. But I worked there for 19 years, not with Estonian, but with Latvian, another language I know and translate from. And I started off as a Finnish translator there, actually. Then I moved to Latvian. I used to translate the news, mostly from the radio, but also from news agencies and newspapers. And I did that for many years. And so it gave me an interest in the affairs of all the Baltic countries and of Finland.
So how many languages can you speak and read?
I started off doing a degree in Swedish, actually. And from there, I moved to Finnish, and from Finnish to Estonian. I did Scandinavian studies when I was young, when I first came to England. That's why I came to England, actually, so I could study Scandinavian languages. And uh, so I also translate from Swedish, but I don't get much opportunity to do that these days. Estonian takes up nearly all my time. But as I mentioned, I had a German teacher who was Estonian, so I know
Oh
German
my
too.
God.
All the Scandinavian languages. Yeah, I'm just fascinated with languages.
Now, why is it so? Any influence from parents or from any way you're grown up by surrounding environment?
That's a deep psychological question, and I think I do have an answer, but I don't know if it's right. Um, I I grew up in a community in the outskirts of Sydney where nobody spoke English. All of my neighbours were um, from Southern Europe. They were all from Italy, Yugoslavia, as it then was. Mostly from there. And so, uh, of course, we did speak English among ourselves, but um, uh, the children of the family spoke English, but the parents didn't. So I got used to bilingual families and hearing foreign languages all the time. Um, uh, and yeah, I think that's my main reason how I at first got interested in foreign languages. Um, I don't have a particular interest in Serbo-Croatian or Italian now, but I know a little smattering of those
Little
languages too.
smattering.
I wasn't actually encouraged to learn languages. Um, well, at school I did take French and I did take German, but nobody encouraged me. I just did it out of my own inner interest. I can't explain really how that developed.
Estonian as language, I read that it is rich with vowels and supposed to be very melodic as a language.
Yes, I think so.
Can you tell us a bit about Estonian as a language?
Well, it's a Finno-Ugrian language, so it's not related to many languages in Europe. Um, not related to its neighbours, apart from Finnish, of course. Um, it's it's very ancient. Um, there's a lot of archaic words in it. Uh, Heavily influenced by German, though, and for instance, German has affected the word order. I would say Estonian sentence word order is more like German than like Finnish, and I'm sure it was originally like Finnish. Um, so, which makes it hard to translate, actually. um, long sentences can get very complicated.
I was about to ask you that because I wanted to ask you how well does Estonian get translated into English? What are the major challenges? That was my question.
Not easy. I mean, I do a little bit of it every day, so I shouldn't say that I'm not familiar with it. But when you're seeing a sentence for the first time on the page that you have to translate, I'm looking everywhere for where the verb is. It could be anywhere. It's a very flexible word order, um, and I can only start translating the sentence when I realize where the subject and the verb are, and then everything falls into place after that. But there can be a lot of qualifying phrases, adjectival phrases that come before a noun, for instance. So, and they can be a whole pile of them, and that's certainly not like English or any Western language. Um, so that's one of the main challenges. So, I have to sit and think about it. A long sentence in Estonian. The novel I'm translating at the moment from Estonian is by someone who writes in long sentences, long complicated sentences, and I get lost sometimes. I have to, I eventually find my way, but in the end, I have to just send my completed text to him and check with him that I've understood him right. Um, but it's one of the things I like most about the language is that it's so flexible and so expressive. Yeah, by changing the word order of something, you can add emphasis to different parts of the sentence, and that's wonderful.
How many number of active translators are there? in Estonian translators into English?
A handful in the whole world, I would say. And I do know only a couple of them personally. But it's interesting you ask that, because I would never meet any Estonian translators if it wasn't for the Estonian Literature Information Centre, which I've been aware of and helped by for the last dozen years or so. At least 12 years I've worked with them. And they are part of a system which efficiently gets the language out into the world in ways that it otherwise couldn't have. It's a lonely business being a translator. You don't need anybody else's company. But the translators that I know all came across the language by accident or by some roundabout route. I'm not in regular touch with any of them now. And I am in occasional touch with some of them. But whenever the Estonian Literature Information Bureau has a gathering in Estonia for translators, they used to have an annual gathering in the summer. And I know they will have one this year, but it'll probably only be about poetry. It's a chance for people from all over Europe and even some from North America to get to know each other and compare notes. And it's good that we're all translating into different languages, but out of those people, maybe only 2 or 3 are translating into English. So even that is a little bit lonely. Yeah.
Were you involved in any mentoring workshop for Estonian translation?
Mentoring, yes. Well, I would say the mentoring has mainly happened through the Literature Bureau. And there has been mentoring. There has been actual mentoring at some of our seminars where one more expert translator gathers people together to translate the same text and compare notes. But that happens very rarely, because the last one I went to in Estonia was about poetry, and there are very few people who could be mentors. The number of English everybody has to be translating into the same language if you're going to have effective mentoring. So it will only be a very small group of translators anyway. And the last time we did it, that was for an online magazine called Words Without Borders, which is published in America. You probably know it.
You have a particular interest in what is called minority and endangered languages. You are also involved in editing this Atlas of the World's Languages in Danger.
Yes, I did do that. Yeah.
So now these are 3 different terms. One is a minority language, other is an endangered language, and we are talking about languages in danger.
A minority language might be actually in a state of good health and not threatened by anything, but that would be because it's spoken in a small, isolated part of a country. And there are many countries, including India. In Europe, there are situations where a language needs a bit of help, a bit of state support. And I belong to the Foundation for Endangered Languages, and we try to, we can't get state support for languages, but we can encourage things in that direction by having conferences and awarding grants. And I think we do make a difference, small difference. But yeah, the difference between an endangered language and a minority language is simply, it's not one of size, because even a big language can be endangered. A good example of a big language that is endangered is Belarusian. In the national language of Belarus gets no public support. Everything has to be in Russian.
Okay, they don't speak Belarusian in Belarus?
Oh no, they do speak it, but it doesn't do it with any official approval. It's all just private home language, and yeah, it is to some extent it is school language, but even then, it's drummed into children the fact that Russian is more important.
So when you say minority language, you are referring to numbers Number of people speaking it?
Yeah, the number of people speaking it within a particular state. It's got to be a minority relative to something else. So it's a minority relative to the majority language of the country. I come from Australia, and it has many minority languages, but they're either immigrant languages or indigenous languages which have been neglected for so long that, they are in danger of dying.
Yeah, tell us about this book, Atlas of the World Languages in Danger.
I was asked to do it by UNESCO in 2008, I think it was, and we started work in 2009 when it was going to be the third edition of the Atlas, and it was going to be the most complete so far. So far, the first two editions had not really covered the whole world, just most of the world. So, and they also told me that it was going to be online and interactive, as well as on paper. So it was quite a big challenge. I had to get a team of experts around the world, and I was recruited because I had already been a co-editor of the Atlas of the World's Languages, which I'm also working on a new edition of now for Routledge publishers. I've also done an Encyclopedia of Endangered Languages with them, and that's also going into a new edition. So I've kept very busy with these things. The idea was to show on a map the location of languages that are endangered according to the UNESCO vitality scale, which had been worked out a few years before, back in 2003. Now, we had to find a way of marking them on a map where it was irrelevant, where the majority languages, the safe languages, were spoken, because that was not part of the map. So in other words, they had to be little pinpoints, all the same size, but in different colors, depending on how endangered they were. So that's the basic idea behind it, both on paper and online. Now, in the online edition, which was interactive, it was open to the public to send in contributions, and we would check them out, see whether they were really the suggestions they made to include a language or subtract a language or change the number of speakers or something. We would check on that.
See, you also were involved in writing two dictionaries, I believe. One is Colloquial Estonian and Colloquial Latvian.
Well, I got the opportunity to teach Estonian at the University College London, and when I started, there was no book available in English that would teach the language. In other words, I had to create my own materials. So I started writing it. I was commissioned to do it by Routledge. And now it's not the only one. It does have competitors now. I want to put it into a new edition if I can find the time. It's designed for the complete beginner learner. And I've been teaching it at the university and to my evening classes, who was run through the university ever since then. And I'm just about to retire from the university, but I'll continue the evening classes as long as there are people interested in Estonian. But it's divided into 20 lessons, and it just tells a story of the same people right through the book. And I like textbooks that do that tell a continuous story. And I just try to teach every aspect of Estonian grammar and vocabulary that they're likely to find useful.
If somebody wants to read Estonian translated literature, can you recommend some books and authors?
Yes, I can. And the first one I'm going to mention, which is Andrus, author of The Man Who Spoke Snakish and many other books. The one I'm translating at the moment, I really like, called Reinraud, Reinraud. He's written many novels, but I'm doing an absolutely fascinating one at the moment, which I have to finish by the end of this year. called Sunscript, the book I'm doing now, but there have been others translated by other people into English. So those are the two contemporary authors that I can think of. There are many more, but there are a lot of authors from the past who are worth knowing too. I think the national literary hero of Estonia is Anton Tammsaare, and I have translated one volume of his 5-volume work called Truth and Justice. Truth and Justice. I translated the second volume, and that has been published. That is just a wonderful story, a continuous story about one family in Estonia in the early 20th century, a time of great upheaval in Estonia when it was becoming independent, when the influence of other cultures was terribly important. I guess it still is, but German culture had been sort of prevailing in Estonian education for hundreds of years. But there was also Russian, in the time of Tsarism, because I'm talking about a time before independence when Estonia was part of the Russian Empire. So everything I have translated really from Estonian has been to a greater extent or lesser extent concerned with identity and national identity and how to extricate the nation from other cultures. And it's terribly important to Estonians, even today, but it was extremely important at the time in the 1920s. And Tammsaare died just a few months before the Soviet Union invaded in 1940. So he lived almost right through the first independence period from 1918 to 1940. And that was when he was writing most of his books. I think he's regarded as a sort of literary hero in Estonia. He's taught in schools, but I don't know if people read him after they leave school. But anyway, they do, at least to begin with.
Now, about this book, Man Who Spoke Snakish, the author of the book is Andrus Kivirak. Can you introduce us to Andrus Kivirak, his other works and themes that he deals in normally?
Yeah, okay, certainly. Well, Andrus Kivirak is now, he'd be 54 years old now. He's become a sort of national figure in Estonia because of because his books tend to be a bit allegorical, and you pointed that out yourself in your questions, and it's true. The Snakish book is allegorical, and a lot of other things he's written are allegorical. He is also a commentator on Estonian affairs in the newspaper, in the media, so he's very well known. I think some people think of him as a children's author, and some people think of him as an adult author. Yes, and I can never be sure which of those two he really is. One thing I love about his work is that he combines comedy and tragedy often in the same sentence. And I think that's a brilliant feature of his work. He was actually, in a sense, very easy for me to translate, but not because his sentences tend to be short, and also he doesn't speak English. So whenever I asked him for advice, he always agreed with what I said. It made it very easy. Whatever I said was okay by him. So, I have met him, and he's been along to encourage us translators to various seminars that the Literature Board organizes. That's a tendency. That's a regular feature of these summer meetings where authors are invited along to talk about their work to people who might want to translate their work, and it works very well. People get indirectly, they get commissions, but then of course comes the hard work of persuading a publisher in the translator's own country to put the book out. And that really is hard work.
Coming to Man Who Spoke Snakish, I read the book, I really loved it. And to me, it read like an allegory. And more importantly, you were talking about minority and endangered languages. The central character, Limet, is the last remaining speaker of the language.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It was important that Limet was sort of alone in the world. Even his good friends were deserting him. And he didn't want to associate with the new culture, which was brought in by the Germans. Of course, the Germans, although they're hardly ever mentioned as Germans. You just know that they are. But his parents and grandparents are the ones who've made him loyal to the old culture. And it's a fascinating idea that humans in Estonia, at least, had once had fangs and then been able to hiss words to animals, which is a great idea. If only we could do it. And I guess one of the important features of the novel is that he meets a snake, and the snake and he can speak to each other and understand each other. And Ince, the snake, is very wise, considering he's so small and with limited experience. But Limet has to take very, very seriously what Ince tells him. And Ince is an instrument for keeping Limet loyal to the old culture. But Kivirak knows, of course, that there are lots of different kinds of loyalty, like the sage, or the sage of the forest. Probably he would think he's the ultimate loyalist. Wouldn't you might remember that he sticks to what he calls old traditions, and they are just nonsense. It's obvious that they are nonsense. So he has to, as a young boy, he has to try and differentiate between the different kinds of truth and loyalty that there are. And he's growing up in a very peculiar environment where bears are, male bears are very attracted to human females, and even to his own sister. Yeah, and they live in a sort of cave. So Kivirak is very careful not to actually mention a time, but we know that it was must be around the early 13th century, because that's when the Teutonic Knights came to Estonia. Now, Estonia wasn't quite as primeval then as Kivirak makes out in this book, but still, it didn't have much sort of infrastructure, and it didn't have a very big population then either. So it was easily conquered, and the conquering was done by the sword, conversion to Christianity. So the aspect of I think Kivirak is very clever. He doesn't criticize Christianity as such, but he criticizes the trappings of a new culture that people only half understand, if we could put it that way. Yeah, and I think that's one of the charms of the book, and one of the charms of Limet. And it's an amazing adventure. On top of all that, he has an amazing adventure, of course. It's full of action and excitement.
It reads like an adventure, but it has a message, strong message too. It brings me to the question, how safe is Estonian as a language?
I'm glad you asked that, because it's very safe now. Estonians, maybe they're naive in their faith in the European Union. Now that they are members of the European Union, nothing can go wrong with the protection of their culture. But actually, they also know that Russia is a great neighbor next door, which has already invaded one country, and it might invade them. And I know they take it seriously. I haven't been there lately, but a friend of mine, one of my students, just returned from there, and she was amazed at how upset and nervous Estonians are about Russia. But so that only affects the language indirectly, of course. the language is used in every aspect of life. Russian used to be taught as the second language in schools, and before that German was. Now it's English that is taught as a second language in schools, so a lot of people know English. Yes, I think the language is very safe because people are very proud of it in Estonia. They're very proud of their language, and it shows in so many different ways. So yeah, I think it's safe now. Maybe the language is safer than the country is.
That's a very strong statement. That's a very strong statement. As a destination for tourists, how is Estonia?
Oh, very good, very welcoming, and quite easy to get to. They love having tourists there. They're used to tourism because when they were in the Soviet Union, they were one of the windows on the West, because Finnish tourists used to come there. And I went there as a tourist from Finland the first time, just across the water, easy to get to on a ferry. And they're used to having foreign tourists there, and they cater for them very well. Everybody I know who's been there enjoys it, and tourism is highly developed.
Can you please read a paragraph from the novel, A Man Who Spoke Snakish? Please read it in English.
The passage I'm reading is about 1/3 of the way into the book, where Lemet is encountering Christianity for the first time in the person of the very intolerant father of a girl that he's falling in love with, a girl called Magdalena, who's being brought up in Christian ways by her father Johannes. Johannes is very pious and strongly believes in the new farming life that people have. No longer hunting, they're just settled people farming in one place and worshipping God in church, and very negative about superstition. So Johannes is extremely suspicious of Lemet as a person who claims to know Snakish. What a terrible and useless thing to be. So it's making the relationship with young Magdalena really quite difficult. And in fact, Magdalena ends up having to give up Lemet. But I'll read this passage now. "Dear boy, keep in mind what I tell you," he whispered. "Actually, there are no Snakish words." This was such a surprising claim that I didn't even burst out laughing. I simply looked the village elder in the eye to see what other odd things he would say or do. "Yes, they don't exist," he repeated. "How else could it be that the church knows nothing of them? Do you think that if God has made the Pope his deputy on the earth, he hasn't made him all-powerful? The Pope is omnipotent. Every word he says is true, and with the help of God he can even make the rivers flow backward. If Snakish words did exist, the Pope would understand them too, and so would other holy men. But they don't, for God hasn't given snakes the power of speech. They shouldn't be spoken to. They should be killed, or else be kept away by the power of prayer, and every holy man is able, with the help of the word of God, to drive all the snakes back to hell. So it is. The fact that you saved my child from a snake today is not your doing, but God's. He looked down from heaven and made the snake lick Magdalena's wound clean." "What's this you're saying now?" I asked. "I do happen to know that I spoke with him, exactly as I'm speaking with you now." "That isn't possible," declared Johannes, and his expression now turned severe. "Snakes don't speak. It only seemed that way to you. You must leave the forest. The devil rules there, and he is leading you astray and making you hear and see things that don't exist. Come to the village, be baptized, start going to church, and you'll soon understand that Snakish words are a delusion." "That will never happen," I said, getting up. "I would have to be completely mad. I do know those words. Listen."